Let's do this. Welcome, everybody. My name is Scott Miller. I'm going to be your instructor tonight. This is our free prep hour, free LSAT prep hour on May 5th, 2020. I am coming to you from Durham, North Carolina. We have a few people here live with us tonight, and we're going to have some people, I'm sure, watching this on YouTube. So let's get started. Let's talk about what we're going to do. So before we get started, a little quick public service announcement / commercial. There are a lot of really good free resources on our Manhattan Prep website. And, I would say don't maybe go here right now. What I am going to do at the end of our session today is I'll put some links in the chat window. For those who are here with us live tonight, I'll put some links in the chat window that you can go and look up to check out some of the other free resources that we have available on the website. If you're watching us later on, if you're watching the YouTube video later on, in the description for the video, you'll find some links to our website and to some other free resources that we have. Here's what we're doing tonight. We are going to talk about LSAT arguments. So the theme tonight is understanding LSAT arguments. And so, there's going to be some advice in here and some information about getting better on matching questions, which a lot of people dislike. Some people are not really big fans of matching questions on the LSAT. So whether you're a fan of matching questions or not, or whether you're, honestly, whether you're a fan of matching questions or not, everybody, I think, can benefit from learning more about LSAT arguments. So, and just a couple quick facts. You may know this already, but 80% of all LR questions require you to understand the components of an argument, which, since there are 2 scored LR sections on the LSAT, normally 2 scored LR sections, that means that LR is 40% of your total score. Now, if you're taking the LSAT Flex, which is coming up, we have the unusual circumstances we're all dealing with right now. The May LSAT and the June LSAT are going to be this LSAT Flex. They only have 1 LR section, but still, even with only 1 LR section, still 80% of all LR questions require you to understand the components of an argument. And that's why we're gonna focus on this tonight. So can somebody tell me in that chat window, and again, if you need to open the chat window, hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen and click on that chat button. And just tell me, what is an argument? Can somebody give me, in the chat window, give me a definition or an example, if you'd rather give me an example. What is an argument? I'll give the people who are here a minute or so to type an answer. And even if it's a guess, even if it's just a guess, it's nice to get right answers, but I'm curious, whatever you guys are thinking, we want to hear what you're thinking. An assertion based, so I'll show you some of the answers that are coming in. One of the answers we have is an assertion based on a set of evidence. So that's one person's definition. Anything else? Any other thoughts about arguments? What an argument is? A reason or set of reasons given in support of an idea. Yeah, it sounds like some people have a good basic understanding of this. Whoops. Not just an idea, but a reason or set of reasons given in support of an idea. Okay, great. So yeah, this now there are multiple definitions of an argument. There are different definitions for an argument, but the definition that we're going to use on the LSAT, when we talk about arguments on the LSAT, we're talking about using a supporting premise to justify a conclusion. So if I say everyone should read The High King by Lloyd Alexander, we're talking about, if we were talking about books tonight, this is our book club, right? If we were doing a book club and I said, oh, everybody should read The High King by Lloyd Alexander. That's not an argument. In fact, that's not even a conclusion. in order for this to be an argument, I'd have to give you some support, some evidence, right? A reason why you would believe, because this by itself is just my opinion. And I actually think everyone should read. If you've never read The High King by Lloyd Alexander, it's a pretty good read, but that's just my opinion, right? So in order to make this an argument, I have to give you some kind of support or a premise. So if I say The High King by Lloyd Alexander won the Newbery Medal, a prestigious literary award in 1969, so everyone should read The High King. Now we have an argument, right? Because I'm not just giving you my opinion, I'm giving you something to support that opinion. So premises are the evidence, right? The evidence that's given in support of the claim or the conclusion. We could say that the whole reason an argument exists is to try to convince you that the conclusion is true. And that's a really important thing to remember about arguments on the LSAT. This is going to come in handy every once in a while. But a really important thing to remember about arguments on the LSAT is we never have to believe the conclusion. The conclusion may or may not be true, right? In fact, we can say the whole point of an argument, the whole purpose of an argument is to convince us that the conclusion is true. And the way the argument does that is by presenting some type of evidence or support. So premises, the evidence, the support, premises tend to be factual, not always, but they tend to be more like facts, more concrete facts. But on the LSAT, we do accept those facts, right? So this is kind of just basic arguments 101 on the LSAT. Conclusion, the main point of the argument exists to try to convince us that the conclusion is true, but we don't necessarily have to believe that the conclusion is true. The premise is supposed to convince us, or premises are supposed to convince us that the conclusion is true. And we do accept premises as true. We're going to accept the premises. We don't necessarily accept the conclusion. And there may be one premise, there may be more than one premise. We usually say premise or premises. But that's the basic structure of an argument. When we talk about arguments on the LSAT, this is what we're talking about. And this is like what we have on the screen right now. You should have, you want to have this down cold. You want to understand this super clearly, no questions about anything we just talked about. These are some of the foundational, fundamental concepts and ideas about arguments that you want to understand. So what I just showed you here, though, is very neat and tidy, a nice, clear example, right? So on the LSAT, they're not going to give you arguments set up the way they are on the screen here, nice and tidy like this. This is not what you're going to see on the LSAT. What you're going to see on the LSAT is something that looks like this. They're going to give you a paragraph that has an argument in there somewhere. And, you know, again, in the logical reasoning on the LSAT, what they're going to ask you to do is strengthen the argument, or maybe weaken the argument, or they'll ask you to find an assumption in the argument, or they'll give you an argument and then ask you to figure out which other argument is a match, right? These are all the things that LR questions, logical reasoning questions on the LSAT ask us to do. So if you're going to do one of these things, like these are what the questions are going to ask us about. So if a question is going to ask you to strengthen an argument or weaken this argument or find an assumption in the argument or find a matching argument, what's important? I'm going to give everybody a minute to, you know, read this paragraph and then let me know if we're being asked to do one of these things, like strengthen, weaken, find an assumption. What's important to notice up here? What would we want to pay attention to? Put it in the chat window. You know, and anything that you want to put in the chat window that stands out to you as important. Maybe there are a couple of words in here that stand out as important to you, or maybe you have an idea of what's important to notice. And while we're doing that, how about, okay, I see some things coming in the chat window. Kayla, and you can totally say no. So just let me know. Just give me a no in the chat window if you don't want to do this, or give me a yes or a no. Kayla, would you like to hop on the mic and talk on the mic for a second and help me out with this? Kayla, give me a yes or no in the chat window. Wow, something really weird is happening with your chat, Kayla. We're getting these really weird, I don't know if it's Zoom or what it is or your computer, but we're getting these weird strings of characters coming through. I'm really sorry about that. I'm not sure what's happening with the chat. I'll tell you what, Kayla, I'm going to give you a chance to talk. And if you want to, so you should see, you don't have to, right? But you should see a talk button in the bottom corner of your screen. And if you want to, would you like to hop on the mic and unmute yourself? If you want to get on the mic, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Did this work?
It does. Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
So Kayla, thank you for getting on the mic and thank you for helping me out with this. So if we're given this paragraph here and we're told there's an argument in here and we're supposed to strengthen it or weaken it or find an assumption or something, what's important up here to notice? What would we want to pay attention to?
One of the first things that I noticed was in the second sentence, it says, but several centuries ago. That shows me that the author is going to have something, I would say, I guess, opposing to what the first sentence says. So they're going to have a different idea.
Yeah, excellent. So very often, this is a really common structure in LSAT arguments, right? They start out with what we call an opposing point or a counterpoint. So that first sentence is something that eventually whoever's writing, the author of this argument, is going to come out and contradict that or say something that opposes that. And so that pivot word, but, is, words like but, yet, however, those are really important because it signifies that that pivot is about to happen. So Kayla, you're doing a good job with this. What else would we want to notice in here? What else is important besides that pivot to that but?
I guess another pivot word would be so in the last sentence.
Okay, and what does so tell us?
I could be wrong, but maybe it's the conclusion that they're coming to.
You are absolutely right. You get 1,000 points. And the points I give away in classes and free prep hours are not good for anything, so I give them away very generously. You just got 1,000 points, Kayla. Thank you very much. So yeah, so is a conclusion indicator. So indicates almost always whatever follows the word so is going to be the conclusion of the argument. And so you notice that contrast there, right? Between it's a common complaint that electronic media have corroded the intellectual skills, blah, blah, blah. And then we get at the end this pivot to, the conclusion, the author's conclusion, which is what awaits us is probably a mere alteration of the human mind, not, devolution, not corroding intellectual skills. So we see that contrast between the first sentence and the last, and that last is the conclusion. Anybody else see anything interesting in this argument in the chat window? Go ahead and put, in the chat window, anything else that we want to notice here that would be important? I'll give people a couple moments to type, and then Kayla, maybe you can share your thoughts. What else is important here? What do you think, Kayla? Anything else important we want to pay attention to?
Maybe the first sentence?
So we said the first sentence is like the counterpoint, right?
Right.
So why should I believe that what awaits us is probably a mere alteration of the mind rather than its devolution? I mean, is that really true? Why would I believe that?
I guess I'm not sure. For the argument, I guess you would just have to accept that their argument is better than what you're given in the first sentence.
Okay. Whoever's making this argument certainly thinks so, but there actually is something in here. If you notice that what comes immediately after but is a premise, right? Support. So this whole second sentence, several centuries ago, the complaint was that intellectual skills were being destroyed by the spread of literacy, right? So now this might not be a convincing argument. You might not read this second sentence and go, oh yeah, that totally convinces me now that the conclusion is true. But whoever is making this argument is trying to present that second sentence as the support for the conclusion. And actually that word so tells us both of those things. So tells us that what immediately follows is going to be, in this case, in this particular argument, so is telling us what immediately follows is the conclusion, but it's also telling us that what comes immediately before is a premise, right? Because of this thing, here's my premise. So because of that premise, I want you to believe my conclusion. All right, Kayla, thank you very much for getting on the mic. You can mute yourself if you want. You can click the mute button.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So here's kind of to summarize what we were just talking about. What's important, what we call the argument core. So when in logical reasoning, when they give you a paragraph like this and they're asking you to strengthen it, they give you a paragraph, they're going to tell you that there's an argument in here, and they're asking you to strengthen the argument or weaken the argument or find an assumption in the argument or find an argument in the answer choices that matches. What's important is always going to be to find the premise, identify the premise or premises, and then identify the conclusion, which is what we call the argument core. Because in order to be able to do any of these things, in order to be able to do anything that the LSAT asks you to do with arguments, you need to understand the structure of the argument, right? You need to understand what is the conclusion of the argument, what is the premise or premises, the support that's being given. And so this is going to be one of your very first steps in approaching the majority of LR questions. One of your very first steps when you read this paragraph is to find the conclusion. What is the conclusion? Find the support for that conclusion. Why should I believe that conclusion? And the reason I'm making such a big deal out of this is because we find that a lot of people, when they're working in logical reasoning, actually do a pretty good job just kind of intuitively, right? So you may be able to just like read this paragraph and get sort of an intuitive sense of what it's all about, an intuitive sense of what the argument is or what the author is trying to say. And then you look at the answer choices and one of the answer choices looks right. So you pick that answer choice and you're going to get a certain number of questions correct by doing that. And the problem is that the LSAT is really good at keeping you at whatever score you will get from that intuitive, sense of reasoning. So a lot of people have trouble. They'll get to a certain point in logical reasoning and start, getting a certain number of questions correct. And then they have trouble pushing beyond that. They have a lot of trouble pushing beyond that and, trouble increasing their score to any degree. And the solution, as much as people don't necessarily like it, the solution is to get better at identifying the core of the argument. Clearly identifying, being able to point to, right, like we can right here on the screen, point to what the conclusion is, point to what the premise or premises are, the support is, and be really, really clear about that. So these indicator words are really important. There's a reason why I highlighted these indicator words. Indicator words like but, or yet, or however, in logical reasoning in these paragraphs, they indicate a pivot between, almost always it's a pivot between like a counterpoint or the thing that the author of the argument is going to disagree with. We're pivoting from that to the argument core, to the actual, essence of the argument, the soul of the argument, the premises and the conclusion that we're actually interested in. And so we want to notice those pivot words, but we also want to notice words like so, that indicate a conclusion, that point to the conclusion. Does anybody else, are there any other words that we see on the LSAT that often point to a conclusion? In the chat window, maybe. What other words do we see in logical reasoning that are important to notice besides so? Yeah, therefore. Thus. Yeah, so there are a number of very common, what we call conclusion indicator words. And you want to start noticing those when they show up. You want to really notice and understand what, structurally, functionally these words do. Yeah, in summary. So all these words and phrases kind of mean the same thing. They're saying, so based on what I've just told you, or based on the evidence I'm giving you, this is what I want you to believe. All right, great. So in order to get better at this, we're going to talk a little bit about a certain type of question called matching questions. There are two types of matching questions. We call them match the reasoning and match the flaw. And if you've done any work in logical reasoning, any work on the LSAT, you probably recognize a matching question. And by the way, this over here, this example is all blurred out. It's blurry intentionally because we're talking big picture here. And I don't want people like looking at this and trying to answer the question, right? So this is blurry. There's a reason why you can't read it. But what we want to pay attention to is just, you probably recognize a matching question because they're long. They're really, really long. And some people don't like these questions at all because they're so long. Right? It's saying this is the question stem you'll see, which of the following arguments is most similar in its reasoning to the argument above? And this tells you why these questions are so wrong, or not so wrong, so long. This tells you why the questions are so long, because they're saying the argument above, right? So they're talking about the stimulus. The stimulus is the little paragraph they give you in the beginning. So there's an argument in there. And then it says which one of the following arguments. So each answer choice is also an argument in itself that you have to read and decipher and understand. And that's why people sometimes don't like these questions, because they take a long time. They can take a long time. They don't always have to take a long time. But in terms of getting better at understanding arguments on the LSAT, I'm going to try to convince you that these matching questions are actually a gold mine. And there are some things that you can do with them, some ways you can practice with matching questions that will help strengthen your understanding of arguments across the board on the LSAT. And so we're going to use these matching questions not as something that we just have to deal with or something that we don't like, but actually a really useful tool that's going to help you in your LSAT prep and practice. So let's talk. We'll talk a little bit about matching questions and how they work, and then we'll talk about how to use them to your advantage. So here's the question. Which of the following uses flawed reasoning that most closely resembles the flawed reasoning used in the argument above? And you may have heard this already, but it's really important to train yourself to ignore the stimulus, ignore the little paragraph that they give you, and read the question stem first. If you're not in the habit of doing that, get in the habit of doing that, because it's going to be really valuable. There are a lot of good reasons to do it that way. So we read the stimulus, which of the following uses flawed reasoning that most closely resembles the flawed reasoning used in the argument above. They're telling us that there's an argument up here. So I want everybody to read the argument up here and find what we call the argument core. What is the conclusion of this argument? And what is the premise or the premises, if there's more than one? Okay. So we have a conclusion indicator here, right? Therefore. So big important word that we want to notice in here, because it's telling us that this last sentence is our conclusion. And it's also telling us that probably what comes immediately before is a premise. Each of Rose's dogs is a cross between a Labrador Retriever and a Saint Bernard. So we have a premise here. We have a conclusion. But then there are two other sentences in the paragraph too. So what are those? What are these first two sentences? Are these first two sentences like, is this another, do we have another opposing point in here? Are these premises? Are they just background information? Somebody tell me in the chat window, how would you describe these first two sentences in the paragraph in terms of the role they play? Are they part of the argument? Okay. Silva Stewart says premises. Yeah, each of Rose's dogs is a cross between a Labrador Retriever and a Saint Bernard. Well, great. What does that have to do with barking? Our conclusion is about barking, being moderate barkers. So the first two sentences tell us something about barking, right? Labrador Retrievers bark a great deal. Saint Bernards bark infrequently. Each of Rose's dogs is a cross between the two, so Rose's dogs are moderate barkers. Now, you may be noticing that some of these arguments are not very convincing arguments, right? You might say, wait a minute, that doesn't really okay, I get it, but that doesn't really make sense. Doesn't mean that our dogs are moderate barkers. And they even tell us that in the question stem, right? They tell us that the reasoning is flawed. So a lot of the arguments that you see on the LSAT in logical reasoning are flawed. They're not convincing arguments, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. But for now, we're just, you know, your first, the step that you want to get used to always doing is clearly identifying the argument core, clearly understanding that this last sentence is our conclusion and all the sentences that come before it are premises. So this particular question is asking us which of the following uses flawed reasoning, which of the following, meaning which answer choice, uses flawed reasoning that most closely resembles the flawed reasoning used in the argument above. And before I go any further, does anybody have any questions before we move on from here? Is everybody okay with what we've talked about so far? Give me an okay or a yes in the chat window if you're good with what we've talked about so far. If you have questions about this, let me know. So these are our premises. First three sentences are our premises. Last sentence is our conclusion. All right. So now we're going to look at answer choices. I'm not going to show you the answer choices in order. I'm going to show you the answer choices in a little bit out of order. But I want you to look at each of these answer choices on the right side of the screen. And again, try to find the core of the argument. What's the conclusion? What are the premises? And then in the chat window, tell me, do you think this is a match? Do you think this answer choice is a matching, gives us a matching argument, or is it not a match? Would this be a correct answer or not? Okay. Silva Stewart says no. I'm going to put you, Silva, I'm going to give you a chance to talk on the mic if you want to. If you don't want to, you don't have to talk on the mic. Just, you know, give me a no in the chat window if you don't want to talk on the mic. But I'm going to activate your mic, and you can click the unmute button in the lower left corner if you want. So tell me what you think about this answer choice, and why is it not a match?
Yeah, I think it's not a match because the conclusion is saying it's a summation, like the premises, the first two premises are the same or similar, but the third question is not necessary. It's not about crossing and having exactly half one and half the traits of the other. It's about having a summation of the two. So it's a different, the conclusion is it's not saying he's half a transcriptionist and half an engineer.
Yeah, that'd be weird. Yeah, it's saying Bob knows both. Yep. So it's not that same half and half thing. Similar, really similar, right? So excellent, Scylla. Thank you. Thank you very much for getting on the mic. And that's 1,000 points for that. So yeah, exactly. Like a very similar structure, right? But we notice that third premise is not doing the same thing, not doing this, giving us the same function or having the same effect as the third premise in the original. So we would get rid of this one. This is not a correct answer. But again, you know, our ability to do that gets much better. Our ability to eliminate D and say that D is an incorrect answer, our ability to eliminate it is much better when we have a clear understanding of the structure of the argument. We know, yeah, same thing, 3 premises and conclusion, but that one premise isn't doing the same thing. We know exactly why this is not a match. In fact, I don't think there's really a flaw in this argument. I think D, delta, is actually a valid argument here, a good argument, convincing argument. So it definitely doesn't have the same flaw as the first one. So again, in the chat window, let's get some more people in the chat window, if you would. Hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, if you would, please. And open up the chat window and let me know what you think about answer choice E. And again, you know, right, wrong, we're not really worried about that tonight. Just what do you think? I'm curious to see what people think. Is this a matching argument or is it a mismatch? Okay, Delissa says wrong. What does everybody else think? Okay, and Delissa, again, same thing. I'm gonna activate your mic. If you don't want to talk on the mic, totally fine. You don't have to. But if you would like to hop on the mic, just hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen, click unmute, and you should be able to talk on the mic. I'm curious, what did you think about this answer choice E echo that makes you think it's wrong? If you don't want to get on the mic, just give me a no thanks in the chat window, and that's totally fine. And if you're thinking about it, oh, okay, no problem. Yeah, then please do write in the chat. Yeah, let me know in the chat what you think. And everybody else, let me know in the chat. What do you think? Like, what part of this argument in E echo makes it not a match? And anybody else who wants to, what do you think? And to tell you what, just because we only have an hour tonight, and just to keep things moving, because there are a few other things I'd like to talk about. What I would say, and just kind of compare this to what you're thinking, it's almost if we switched, so it's the same, it's very similar structure, right? We have this therefore keyword in the last sentence that indicates this last sentence is our conclusion. So, and everything else is a premise, right? Kind of similar structure, but it would almost make more sense if that third premise was the conclusion and the statement we're given as the conclusion was the third premise, right? That would maybe make a little more sense, but even that wouldn't be right. Like, it would have to be something like half of the dress, or each of the dresses, because the third premise here says each of Rose's dogs. So if we had something like each of the dresses in the closet was closet was made half by Connie and half by Kenesha. Therefore, all of the dresses are like halfway not well made or badly made or something, right? Like, yeah, there's definitely, again, a difference in the third premise, but also a difference in the conclusion. All right, so let's keep going with this. Let's look at this one, B Bravo. Let me know in the chat window, what do you think about B Bravo here? Is this a match? Is this not a match for our original on the left-hand side? Okay. Seen some people saying yes, yeah. So we have a pretty good match here. All type A chemicals are extremely toxic. All type B chemicals are non-toxic. The household cleaner is a mixture. Therefore, the household cleaner is moderately toxic. Okay, which again, we can see why maybe this is not a convincing argument, because I don't know, maybe when you mix the two things together, it's like mixing, is it bleach and ammonia? I think you're never supposed to mix together because they're like, it's really deadly. If you mix the two together, it makes some kind of like poison gas. So I don't know, maybe chemical A is bleach and chemical B is, ammonia or something, right? So that's not going to work. So, so this is just, and again, part of the reason why we're doing this is not like the most difficult matching question that you'll see, but a couple things to take away here. First of all, if you're really new to matching questions, hopefully this gives you an idea of how this type of question works. But also notice that we're able to make pretty quick work of some of these answer choices because we invested a little bit of time up front talking about the stimulus, because we took the time to be really clear about the argument core. We were really clear in the beginning that this last sentence is our conclusion and these other sentences are our premises. We know very clearly and definitively we can identify the core of this argument, premises and conclusions. We're crystal clear about that. So now as we look at these answer choices, just, we can very clearly identify what the premises and conclusion are of each answer choice and recognize either yes, it's a match or it's not. So again, just one example of how being very clear, having a clear understanding of the argument core can help you and will help you on the LSAT with logical reasoning questions. This is one of the most fundamental skills that you want to build in logical reasoning. So what do you want to remember in practice here? You know, hopefully you're making some notes to yourself and think about anything we've talked about so far that, you know, even if it's just one or two things, even if it's just, oh yeah, I need to spend more time understanding what an argument really is and being able to identify the argument. You know, let me make sure when I start working on one of these questions that involves arguments that I take the time to understand, you know, the premise and conclusion. If that's your takeaway, that's great. Okay. So let's look at another matching question. And again, I'm going to say you want to always get in the habit of reading past that little paragraph, ignoring the little paragraph that they give you, and always reading the question stem first. Make sure you identify your task. Make sure you're clear about what your task is. So again, this is a matching question. Which of the following arguments is most similar to the argument above? They're not necessarily telling us there's a flaw, but it's asking for a match. So again, they are telling us that there's an argument. So we're going to take the time to read this and understand the argument core, clearly identify the argument core. So everybody take a moment to do that. Okay, so just to keep things moving, we see that we have this keyword indicator, therefore, right? Once again, we have this nice juicy word, therefore, indicating that this last sentence is our conclusion. Now, again, therefore also indicates that what comes immediately before is a premise. So this, I cannot keep and break the same promise, that's our premise. But notice that the conclusion has something to do not just about promises, but answering questions truthfully. So what do we know about answering questions truthfully? And this is one of the questions you might ask yourself when you're reading an argument like this, and maybe you're not sure whether that first sentence is a premise or not. Always ask yourself, does it give me more information that helps support the conclusion? And in this case, it does, because our conclusion is not just about, you know, answering questions. It's not just about keeping promises. Our conclusion also introduces the idea of answering questions truthfully. So yeah, this first suppose, you know, suppose is not usually something that indicates a premise, but in this case it does. This first sentence is also a premise. So again, we have our argument core, crystal clear, right? Last sentence, one cannot be obliged to both answer all questions truthfully and keep all promises, is our conclusion. Why should we believe that? What evidence is given? Everything else in here is a premise. Okay, so now again, same thing. We're going to look at answer choices. So once we've read our stimulus, our paragraph here, clearly identified the argument. Now we're going to look at the following arguments, the answer choices, and see whether they're a match or not. So take a look at answer choice D here and let me know in the chat window, does D look like a match? What do you think? Okay. Somebody tell me in answer choice D in the chat window, tell me what the first, like, give me the first few words of the conclusion in the chat window, if you would, everybody, if you would, type the first few words of the conclusion. Yeah, okay, so keyword indicator, right? Either the creditors. So that's our conclusion. Okay. And I think actually right there in those first few words of the conclusion, you know, some people are saying this isn't a match, and we actually have enough reason right there in those first few words to know that this isn't going to be a match. It's that word either, either, either or. So our conclusion is an either or conclusion. Our conclusion is saying either it's one thing or the other. And if you notice back in our original, it's saying we can't do both two things at the same time. So our original is saying, no, we can't do these two things at the same time. Our answer choice D here is saying, so it's either one thing or the other. Now, I guess, I don't know, maybe that's not as big of a problem as I thought now that I'm thinking about it, because they're kind of the same thing, aren't they? Right? Like it's, you know, if you can't do both things at the same time, it kind of is the same thing as saying it has to be either one or the other. So maybe I would be suspicious of answer choice D because of that, but maybe, you know, on a really, really difficult version of a matching question, they actually could do that to you. You know, the original might say we can't do both things at the same time. The correct answer might say it's either one or the other. I would still be on the lookout for other answer choices that are more appealing though, or a better match. And maybe, you know, maybe what I might be looking for here is do the premises line up? Like, are they similar premises, or is it a different type of argument structure there? What do y'all think about the premises? Do the premises look like a good match for the original? Yes or no? Should we keep this in the running or not? So let's see. Some people are putting some answers in the chat window. Say question D is applying a principle to the example, whereas the stimulus is extrapolating a principle from an example. Okay. Applying a principle to the example. Okay. All right. So it looks like some people are seeing some things in the premises that aren't really lining up well. So maybe we would feel good getting rid of D right now. You know, again, on the LSAT, you're not just going to have one answer choice to look at and say, yes, it's right or no, it's not. So let's look at some of these other answer choices. Let's look at answer choice B, Bravo here. What do you guys think of this? Is this a match or not? Are we going to say answer choice B is similar in its reasoning to the original? Or are we going to say, no, it's not similar. It's not a match. Can somebody tell me, I've asked this question before, can somebody in the chat window, or everybody in the chat window, tell us what are the first few words of the conclusion in this argument? Give me the first few words of the conclusion. Okay, yeah, we have a few different ideas here, right? So this is an interesting one to look at. We have a couple of differences. We have some differences of opinion, a little bit of a debate going on in the chat window. So we have this word so, right? Our conclusion, normally a conclusion indicator. So is normally a conclusion indicator. But then we have this word sense. And what does sense do? Does anybody know what the word sense does when you see it in one of these paragraphs in logical reasoning? Does anybody know what sense is telling us? Yeah, premise. Sense is a premise indicator. So just like there are clear conclusion indicators on the LSAT, there are also premise indicators. Our normal premise indicators are words like since, because, for, those are common premise indicators. And this is actually not an unusual structure. What you're going to see sometimes is a conclusion indicator, like so, or therefore, a comma, and then a premise indicator. And then the premise, and then another comma, and then conclusion. So this is one of the things to watch out for. Yeah, I see some people are seeing it now. This is one of the things to watch out for in the LSAT. We've been looking at some fairly simple arguments now, and now we're starting to get into some ones that are a little more complicated. So you want, there are some really common structures. First of all, the indicator words are really important to notice. It's really important to know what these indicator words are and learn these indicator words and recognize them when you see them. And then also recognize some of the common structures like the one we see at the end of this sentence. So a single sentence, or the end of this argument, I should say, the end of this paragraph, a single sentence can have both a premise and a conclusion in it. And you need to watch out for that. They're not always going to be in separate sentences. So yeah, a premise in this argument is right here. Since the only way for some, so our premise is the only way for some politicians to be popular is to deceive. And another important word here too to notice is and. And is actually a really useful word on the LSAT. When you see a premise followed by the word and, what that usually means is that you're going to see another premise. So a premise or a premise, and then a comma, and then the word and, that and is telling you that whatever follows is also a premise. So another premise, any politician needs to be popular. Conclusion, it follows that some politicians must deceive. So that very last statement is actually our conclusion. So again, this gets a little more complicated, right? But notice that we're still using these indicator words. So, since, even it follows that. It follows that is an indicator of a conclusion. So and, even a word like and, stuck in between two premises. When you see something and you think it's a premise and you see that word and, that kind of tells you, wait a minute, there are two premises in there we want to evaluate. So the better you get at recognizing these indicator words when you see them, and the better you get just in general at being able to, read these paragraphs and really pull out the premises and the conclusions, the better you're able to, because this answer choice B is written very differently from our original, but it could be a match. Maybe it's a match, maybe it's not. We'd have to really be clear. We have to look carefully at the argument core and see, is it, and be clear about what the conclusion is to see whether it's a match or not, and be clear about what the premises are. So this is saying some politicians must deceive. It's kind of like some politicians must do both, is what it's saying. So it's kind of, I think somebody even said in the chat window, it's kind of the opposite. It's kind of saying some people must do both. It's not, instead of the original, which is saying we can't do both. So yeah, B wouldn't be a match. Okay, so I said earlier that, so we would eliminate answer choice B, not a match, mainly because even we can see without getting too far into it that our conclusion is different. Conclusion saying something very, very different from what our original said. Just based on that, we can get rid of B. Okay, so I said, earlier, you can already see that we're getting a little bit of workout as we evaluate the stimulus and as we evaluate each of these answer choices. We're getting a workout in our process for understanding arguments, for breaking an argument down into its parts and understanding what is the conclusion, what are the premises. I'm going to show you a drill that you can do. That I recommend this to my students all the time, and I find it really valuable. And it's one of those things that maybe seems, I don't know, to some people it seems really, really simple. To other people, it seems kind of a pain and kind of complicated. But I think whichever end of that spectrum you're on, whatever your opinion is of this drill at first glance, I'm going to recommend that you try it. Because I think doing this drill, and what I want to say is this is a drill, it's not a strategy. I'm not showing you something that you would do while you're actually taking the LSAT. This is not something that you're going to practice so you can do it under actual test conditions. This is not the way that you answer, the process that you follow to answer matching questions or any other questions. This is a drill that you can do. So once you've done a practice test, or once you've worked through some LSAT questions And after you've gone back and reviewed them, or while you're going back and reviewing questions that you've already done, you can do this drill that we're talking about. And what the drill is basically taking one of these paragraphs, an argument, and writing it out in your own words. So, and you know, I would write, so what I would take what I would do is, and even if you're writing it almost verbatim, that's fine. Like you don't necessarily have to reword or rephrase. You can put it in your own words if you want, but even just writing it out step by step, piece by piece. So premise or premise one, you know, you could either just write premise, or you can even number the premises, right? You could say like premise one, and then write out the premise. What does the premise one say? Premise two, premise three, and then conclusion. So writing them out on paper and really, you know, actually writing them down, each one down, either verbatim or rephrasing them a little bit. And then, you know, the conclusion. And then looking at the argument. So, you know, if this is another type of question, if we were asking you to like strengthen the argument, you know, this, what I'm suggesting here, this drill does two things. It helps you more clearly be able to identify and understand the structure of an argument, be able to identify the argument core. This can help you do a much better job of everything that we've been talking about all the way up to this point. By actually forcing yourself to write it out, you're really thinking very carefully and clearly about how the argument over here is put together and what this argument on the left side is actually saying. So you're forcing yourself to be really picky about understanding the structure of the argument, the core of the argument, because you can write all this down and then look at it and say, well, wait a minute, actually, is that really a premise? Did I get this right? Did I get all the premises? Like, what are these other things? So we're just focusing, you know, when you do this exercise, I would say just focus on premises and conclusions. If you identify something as truly like an opposing point or background information, then, you know, you can leave that out. We're really focusing on just writing down the premises and conclusion. If you know what an intermediate conclusion is, if there is an intermediate conclusion, you would include that in there. We haven't talked about those, but that's also part of the argument core. Okay, so same thing here for this one. So again, this is a little more complicated, right? This argument is put together in a little more complicated way. So it might be a little clearer to you when you actually write it out, you know, in your own word, or, you know, write it in your own words, or even write it verbatim, you know, write the actual statements that are in the argument itself, but you're just focusing on what the premises and conclusion are. And this argument actually gets a little simpler when you do it this way, because really those first few, you know, the first sentence is just kind of a setup, kind of a background information. The last sentence really contains the entire argument. The only way for some politicians to be popular is deceive. Any politician needs to be popular. Those are my premises. Conclusion, it follows that some politicians must deceive. That's our, you know, our conclusion. So doing this exercise, you know, I recommend, even if you're looking at it and going, I'm not sure, like, is this really going to help me? Try it out. And I definitely recommend that you do this with any logical reasoning questions that you have trouble with that involve arguments. If it's a strengthened question, a weakened question, a sufficient assumption question, a necessary assumption question, a matching question, any of these questions that involve arguments, if you're really struggling with a question, take the time to write out the premises and conclusion the way I'm showing you here on the screen, on the right side of the screen. Take the time to write them out. And then, you know, whatever it is you have to do with the argument, when you look at it this way, with everything structured very neatly, you might see things that you didn't notice the first time. And again, this isn't something that you're going to do when you're actually working under time conditions. This isn't something that I would recommend that you do, you know, when you're actually taking the test. But by doing this in practice, by doing this as a drill, you'll find that it improves your ability and strengthens your ability to read an answer choice like this and very quickly identify the pieces. You know, you don't have to, after doing this a number of times, you'll get to a point where you don't have to write it down. You'll see it when you read it. And these keywords like so and since and it follows, that they're going to jump off the page at you, and you'll know exactly what they mean and exactly what they're telling you. You'll be able to just point right to the conclusion and right to the premises. And again, the reason that matching questions are so good for this is because every answer choice is an argument. So what I would suggest you do to take this one more step is go, look at some matching questions that you've worked on before. If you've done some practice tests, or, as you're studying for the LSAT, as you're doing some practice tests or completing, logical reasoning sections, go find the matching questions. And for each matching question, do what we're doing on the right side of the screen here with the stimulus, with the original argument, write it out. Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, or however many premises there are, and then conclusion. And then, yeah, FW, I see your question. I'll answer that in a second. Then write them out. So write out the stimulus and then write out each answer choice as, just the way we're doing here on the screen. Write out each answer choice and what you're doing. So for every matching question, this is why I said matching questions are a gold mine. For every matching questions that you see, you get 6 chances to practice deconstructing an argument and writing it out clearly and analyzing the argument structure. You get the original stimulus, and then you get the 5 answer choices. So this is a great drill. And again, with some things like this on the LSAT, some of these drills, you don't have to spend a huge amount of time doing this. I'm not saying that you're going to do this every day for the next 3 months, right? This is something you could spend a little bit of time. Maybe you take an afternoon and do this. Maybe you take an hour or 2 and do this. Maybe just an hour doing this. Maybe a half hour doing this. But definitely take the time to do this and do it with some matching questions, because again, matching questions give you, every matching question there's 6 arguments in there to look at and to deconstruct the way we're doing here. Write them down, actually, like physically on paper, write them out. And see what that does for your understanding of arguments on the LSAT and for your ability to understand these questions really well and answer them. And again, any type of question in logical reasoning, any question that involves an argument, if you really have a hard time understanding the question, take the time to write the argument out like this, the stimulus out like this. All right, so question in the chat window. What is the sentence before so? Aren't they taken as premises as well? So our conclusion is that some politicians must deceive. Well, why must some politicians deceive? The first premise says the only way for some politicians to be popular is to deceive. Okay, well, maybe they don't need to be popular, but the next premise says any politician needs to be popular. So really, with just these, I think with just those 2 premises, we have enough information to say, well, yeah, I guess it follows that some politicians must deceive. It says some politicians could attain popularity only by making extravagant promises. This would deceive some of the people. So I don't know. Maybe you look at it differently. It looks to me like the first 2 sentences are really just, the first sentence. The first sentence is just kind of setting up the argument, and we actually have all the information we need in the second sentence to have an argument. We have the premises, we have the conclusion. That first sentence doesn't really add anything else that provides more support than we already have from these 2 premises. So that's the way I was looking at it. But good question. Yeah. All right, yeah, excellent. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone. Hopefully what you saw here, hopefully what we found here tonight are some things that, some ways, maybe a little bit better understanding of arguments on the LSAT, maybe a little bit better understanding of matching questions and how to approach matching questions. Oh, what was the answer to that matching question? Great, yeah, I'll go back and show you that. The correct answer to this one is, I'll show you, actually, I don't think we looked at this answer choice. Answer choice A. Answer choice A ends up being the correct answer for this one. Oh, and all the questions we're using tonight are on the June 2007 LSAT, which is, I believe, still available for free. You can still download this off the LSAC website. So that's part of the reason why we use these questions from the June 2007 test, is because you can go and look at these yourself. So this was question 12. The other question we looked at, I can show you, is, let me go back to it, question 2. Question 2 is the other question we looked at. So if you want to go back and review these and look at all the answer choices, then you are welcome to do that. Just get that June 2007 test. So what was the other question? More examples of premise indicating words. So another question in the chat window, more examples of premise indicating words. Sure. So the common premise indicators are for, because, since, Those are really common premise indicator words. For often it will appear in the middle of a sentence, like, you know, it follows, some politicians must deceive, comma, for any politician needs to be popular, and the only way for some politicians to be popular is to deceive, right? So for is a premise indicator, usually comes after a conclusion in a sentence. Because could be in the middle of the sentence, could be in the beginning. Because and since often come in the beginning of a sentence, though. Another common one is after all. And even some words like, some words or phrases like, for example. So those are common premise indicators. Anything that means like, here's why I want you to believe my conclusion. You know, the conclusion indicators are words like so, thus, therefore. Any words or phrases that mean, here's what I want you to believe. Here is my main point. Premise indicators are words or phrases that mean, here's why I want you to believe that thing. Right. Excellent. So just a couple things to wrap up. So again, if you have any specific takeaways, anything that we talked about tonight that you want to remember and practice, and I would definitely do that writing out the argument drill, writing it out in the form, premise, 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 conclusion at the end. That can be really, really valuable. And then, like I said, I will, in the chat window here, for those who are here tonight, I will put some links in the chat window to our, a couple things that you might find useful. So our free resources page on our LSAT website. There are a lot of pretty good free resources that we offer, and I suggest checking those out. You might find some things that are going to be useful to you as you complete your LSAT prep. You can find a list of upcoming classes. So you can attend session 1. If you found that this was kind of useful, you can attend session 1 of any of our LSAT classes for free. So, and it's actual session 1. It's not like a watered down free trial class. It's an actual session 1 class. And you can attend session 1 for free and see if you like the way we teach, and if you find it helpful. You can decide if you want to sign up for the whole class or not, or just come to session 1 and learn some stuff. Also, I put a link to our LSAT blog. Go to our website, our LSAT website, and check out our LSAT blog. There's some really good information on there, including some information that was just published a couple days ago. Laura Damone, one of our LSAT instructors, did a really good write-up, a really good blog post on the LSAT Flex, which is the at-home LSAT that LSAC is allowing people to take right now with the current situation going on with coronavirus, the take-it-home LSAT. So if you are planning to do that at-home LSAT, the LSAT Flex, if you end up doing that, our LSAT blog, this article that Laura Damone wrote, came out May 1st, really, really excellent, I think, summation of the main things that you want to know about LSAT Flex and how to prepare for it. So check out the stuff on our blog. Check out the upcoming classes if you want to attend a class and check out one of our classes. Attend session 1 for free. Check out the other free resources. Again, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, check out the description for the video and you'll find links to some of this stuff. But that's all I got, folks. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Have a good evening. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and say goodbye to the folks who are watching us on YouTube. Goodbye, and hope this is helpful.